how do I find the balance? Well, then I go and I party too hard, or I use stimulants, or I use something, that's too much,
so
or I sleep too much, or whatever.
So I shouldn't work myself to death, go to full burnout, and then recover by going on a bender?
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Taking Action. I'm your host, Michael Allen. Today, I'm joined with my co-host, Ryan Peaton, and also our guest, Dr. Susan O'Leary. She is a chiropractor and an expert in wellness. Susan, please tell the audience a little bit about your background.
Hi. So I've worked as a chiropractor in St. John's in Newfoundland for 27 years. Before that, I've got a degree in neuroscience through Memorial, actually. So that was a psychology degree. And then I went to Toronto and I studied to be a chiropractor. And since then, I've delved in a lot of areas. And so I've been, working in creating wellness over this, I can't believe how long this career is at this point. You just said that you didn't have training wheels off when I started. But it's been a meandering path of, various types of integrative wellness centers and working with other people. Mm-hmm. And now I'm at this juncture where I have a business called Soul Wellbeing. And we met a few years ago when I sort of started to launch that. And that's kind of, I think, serendipitously has led us back to this moment.
Absolutely. So yeah, I remember at that time as well, you were working a lot with fascia. And I think we're going to dive a little bit into that today. So for our audience, can you give a simple definition or description of what is fascia?
Right. So that can be a wormhole of science, but we're not going to do that, I don't think. So my whole career, body work sometimes gets labeled, massage is this or physio's that, or, various things, or acupuncture is this. And so fascia is sort of a general term for connective tissue that's in the body, a particular type of connective tissue in the body. And so for someone like me that works in the fascia, it's sort of an integration of several different techniques that work on that level of the body. Fascia itself is the tissue that wraps around the muscles, wraps around
muscle fiber.
Around nerves, yes. It's actually through muscles. It's around your organs. It would be the dura, which is around your spinal cord. It's around and through your brain. So it's sort of this, not just a tissue, but it's actually a system. So we actually call it the fascial system.
Interesting.
So I feel when people hear the word chiropractor, they think they come see you, they're going to lie on a table and you're going to twist them and move them and crack their back and crack their neck. But you're so much more past that.
So yeah, I actually have been doing it my whole career. And I was lucky enough when I studied in Toronto, I was really drawn to that work. And I think it came because of my neuroscience background. So I ended up drawn to neuroscience because I was always passionate about how the mind-body connection worked. And I was also really fascinated by looking at how the body heals itself. And so if we sort of move away from, how we fix the body, I was always wanted to know, why does that happen and what's sort of the magic behind it? To backtrack even more, we've talked a little bit about this. I was drawn even young in life to, be interested in indigenous practices, and old ways of medicine and meditation. Long before I kind of knew what it was sort of like something a bit like drawn to Harry Potter, maybe in a different way, like through stories and stuff like that of people that were doing those things. So when I went to chiropractic school, I was drawn more to that kind of work. And I was lucky enough to have some mentors who were clinicians there that came more from an older style of work called osteopathy in Europe and in Britain and in Australia. And so I just sucked up to them as much as I could and learned everything. So I was treating organs and doing what's called visceral work, visceral manipulation, which is where we work in the fascia around organs. Unwinding, what's called cranial sacral unwinding, where you work in the cranial bones, work in the cranial nerves.
So let me ask you this. Who would book an appointment with you?
Well, anybody.
Anybody interested. Let me rephrase my question.
Who does?
What would prompt me to say, I need to book an appointment with Dr. Susan O'Leary?
Right. So what I'm seeing as things have gone on, in the beginning, it was actually not woo-woo. I like to use that word with kindness and fun. But it was kind of woo-woo because people didn't understand it. And so one of the conversations myself and Michael have had is that there's been a breakthrough in understanding the nervous system, especially since the pandemic came, because trauma has really risen to the surface and an understanding of that. But this work has been going on a really long time.
Yeah, so did you notice a spike in business in the past few years with the pandemic? Because I personally have seen more trauma in all different ways.
Right. And so that's what that event, this was a collective event, and a collective event that invoked trauma for everybody, because we had something come in that shut the world down and then made us uncertain for our safety, which brings out the root sense of fear within us. That's a very old part of our nervous system.
Sure.
And so that old part of our nervous system is where trauma lies. And so this is where so the work that came out in trauma work is through this theory, which has now been really taken. It's no longer a theory that they're studying. It's now in practice. And it's called polyvagal theory. So not to get, again, too sciencey on it, but it was talking about why, when we just talked about things that happened to us, why we didn't heal. And I mean, working with like soldiers and people in the military, we saw for a long time, like a lot of people didn't get better, and in other cases of trauma. And so these researchers have been studying what's called the vagal nerve. And the vagal nerve, now for me, is how I'm able to take the woo-woo out of stuff that people didn't understand before.
So woo-woo for you, is that kind of like what people would perceive as the wish-washy, the not really any science behind it, but you're saying now.
Right. And so we knew it at work. It's been around on we've been doing these techniques since the 1800s and probably long before, I mean, what's gone on in indigenous medicine has been on the planet for a very long time, and they had figured it out. If it came from India, it had terminology that was very descriptive, so we didn't get it. If it came from, say, other Eastern philosophies out of China or Japan, and it was acupuncture or Chinese medicine, again, they had too much damp and too much wind and these kind of terminologies when it got translated into English. And so that was pushed away. But the vagal nerve is actually how we've now are able to describe how much of these techniques work. And fascia was a bit like that, it was kind of like the thing in anatomy that was scraped off to see what was underneath, because we wanted to see the bones and the muscles, right? And we wanted to see the organs, because that's where we went in and did surgeries, and we went in and did those kind of things.
Yeah.
But the fascial system, what's really, really cool about it is because it's attached to everything, it's a full system through the body, and it's where the receptors lie for our nervous system. So the neurotransmitters, which is all the chemistry of the body, get flooded and they attach onto these receptors. And the receptors then send a signal to your brain. And then your brain sends a signal down. So when we start treating trauma in the brain is only responding where the memory of everything that's happened is coming from the body, because that's what's sending the signal up.
So how does the brain store the trauma in the fascia? Like, what's that fascia
trauma
connection?
This could be a little more complicated than probably even I can go into. Researchers and stuff will be able to give you more, because I do this stuff more on a practical level. But if we think of the chemistry, and I want to make sure I get this right so that I don't lose people, but let's say we have a stressful experience, okay? So let's use the basic one that's out there all the time, that you're out somewhere walking and like a lion jumps out at you, right? That's the common one people will talk about. So when a lion comes at you, your brain immediately is going to get a signal of
oh shit.
Pretty much. I say go gadget legs, because there used to be Maxwell Smart years ago when I was a kid, and that was a saying, and some people get it. And so what engages in your body immediately through this vagal nerve is that there's a threat. Now that will engage your fight or flight system. So pretty much your vagal nerve says, shut off. We're not going to relax. We're not going to digest food. We're not going to fight a flu. We're not going to worry about our grocery list. We're not worrying about anything. We're going to push all our resources to being able to engage our bodies in vigilance and tension so we can fight,
and
flight, run, or freeze.
As you can.
Run as fast as you free, or freeze, right? And so one of the responses when we looked at the vagal nerve is sort of what they saw in soldiers years ago is this response called shell shock, where you actually would see they would freeze and drop and they wouldn't be able to go anywhere. So there's a point of shutdown that happens. So you actually blow the system so much that we've learned to we just don't go in. And people sometimes faint, all those other things that can happen.
Yeah, what's that saying? It's you get a fright and you freeze.
And you freeze.
It's there's an actual saying to it. I can't.
You're gonna freeze, fight or flight.
Yeah, like you freeze up. You get such a shock, you can't move.
You can't move.
So that's what you're talking
and
about.
some people will actually faint and other things, right? And so this is the part, this is meant to keep us safe when something is so much that we can't process it, So these are some of the things we actually knew happened, but we didn't understand why. And now we understand that it's called polyvagal, because we understand that there are more, it's not just a single nerve and it's not like we have on and off, fight or flight, and then we have vagal response, rest and digest. We actually recognize that there's this section it's described below the diaphragm, which is sort of the dorsal vagal, and then the ventral vagal, which is above the diaphragm. And there's two pieces to it. So when we're in trauma, we're running much more of what's called the dorsal vagal, which puts us more into that shutdown stage. And it's sort of a way of protecting us. But we're meant to engage ourselves out with the fight or flight or something else. And then we're meant to come right back and come back to what's called safety, which is the ventral vagal. So it's meant to be a process. But often when we have something that's happened to us that we can't process in the moment, it's stored. So put on the back burner. We'll deal with that later because we do have to run. And then we run, but then we don't process it. So it stays in the body.
So that could stay there for someone's entire life?
Well, a lot of people, I think that's what we talk about, even we talk about ancestral trauma, is potentially that we pass this on, because now some of it is useful, like to learn not to fall off a cliff is good ancestral memory, you know what I mean, or fear. But then some people can't go and look at a beautiful vista because that fear keeps them from being on the edge, even though they know they're safe. Okay, so some people with trauma then will activate and keep themselves more in this fear part of the body. And so the part of the brain that activates fear is much different than the part of the body that access connection, social connection, love, creativity, inspiration, relaxation, repair, regeneration, all those kind of things.
So when you're working with somebody to repair this and to relieve this trauma or process the trauma, what does that look like?
So I tend to do most of my work, and I say I do help people release trauma from the body from a wellness perspective, because people who are actually how to process trauma, I refer them out and to work with trauma workers, and they're often in the psychology and the social work and that kind of field.
I would think that when people think of trauma or if they think, I have trauma, I know, or if they don't even recognize it, even for me, I would think trauma is in the mind.
Right. And it's not. And so that's it. We know trauma's in the body. And so when we were talking about the cold water and thermal cycles that people are doing, this is actually one of the things that's happening is we're starting to learn how we can, the term that's used is regulate. We're learning to get into regulation and how we can actually understand our nervous system to understand where on the dial we are, why we're on the dial. And that's where like some of these, sweat lodges have been used for years, as well as diving in, cold water, and it's often been used together, which I actually was saying to Michael, that's my preference. I actually prefer very hot places to regulate myself, and I love extreme heat, and I can be in saunas for 2. I've been in sweat lodges for 4 hours,
Wow.
And that's a beautiful experience. And as you do that, you actually move yourself beyond some of these states to other states where when you get to ventral vagal, you move through them into some of the states of consciousness that we might talk about that bring us to bliss and joy, openness, open up our brain to creativity and things like that. So it's like this, if you picture it like a spectrum of where we can move ourselves. Rush. Right. So there's, there's serotonin and dopamine, there's oxytocin. These are the chemicals. There's lots of them.
Sure.
Here's a little tidbit that a lot of people don't know that I think sort of fits with this, is that serotonin is one a lot of people hear about because it's often talked about in depression and some other issues. Good chunk of the serotonin is actually produced by your gut. 80% of it is a number that I hear. I mean, I don't know if we know for sure, but most of it is produced through the gut rather than the brain. So this is another piece that we're starting to uncover, that it's not the brain. It's a lot of this is happening in the body. And this is where this is starting to become really, really exciting for all of us that are trying to help people.
Is that why when you hit a stressful, something happens, something comes at you really fast, and something stressful happens, you get a phone call, it's bad news, whether personal or business, and you get a stomach ache?
Right, exactly. Right in the gut,
in some cases
right?
you feel like you're going to throw up.
Right.
Yeah. I'm starting to think now of the body more in terms of the chakras.
Right.
And it's not all about the brain anymore. Now we're learning that the heart has neurons, and the heart actually has memory. I think it has about 40,000 neurons that are used to encode things, which is just fascinating.
There's
and now
way
the gut
more.
as well.
So that's what exactly. So there's way more nerves from the heart to the head than from the head to the heart. And so there's a group that I've followed their research for 20-something years. They've been developing stuff. I don't know if they've been in the business. It's called Heart Math. And the Heart Math Institute, but they're all been researchers and doing stuff for a long time. But that's actually what they're doing, is studying what's called coherence. And coherence is when the brain and the heart rhythm, I'm going to describe it as a rhythm, but it's when it's in synchronicity. So there's a wave that happens, and it's called heart rate variability, when it's equal. Yeah, that's the space between heartbeats. Right, and you'll see it like the sine wave, right? Yeah. When we get our brain into, let's say, brain cycle or waves that also match with our heart rhythm, which is in a regular rhythm, a certain rhythm that we can get to. When they're into a certain state, it goes into what's called coherence. And that's when we know we're into this, what's called the ventral vagal part, as opposed to the dorsal vagal, which is where we're going to be more into the trauma. So this is actually what we're trying to do a lot of the times. If we can get ourselves into this heart coherence, we activate a different part of our brain. We take ourselves out of that, what's called the reptilian, and the part of us that's more into the memory, the emotional, the past, and fear, into this other state. That's a coherent state. And that's where we get into states of flow. That's where we get into what's social connection.
So where would you even start? And let me ask you a second question before you answer the first. And I'm curious if this is related at all, because sometimes I'm thinking about athletes. Sometimes they say, I'm in the zone.
State of flow, yeah.
They get warmed up and all of a sudden things start clicking and their body starts reacting and everything just flows easy and they're on their game.
Right.
Is that
totally
that type of connection that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I used to be a competitive curler, actually, in another. So I've had many incarnations of things that do things. Yeah. Yeah. I just love doing things and trying different things. But I started curling like at 11, so that was my thing, and I was in Canada Games. And so I ended up like at Tournament of Hearts. So I represented Newfoundland, and I was at the Tournament of Hearts like 5 times. And so when you play, you move your way up through any athletics, you're playing at higher and higher levels of adrenaline. Then you actually learn and have those experiences. And when you play with a team, flow states also are really, really interesting. So that's exactly, athletes know how to get there. Like they're always sort of teetering with what gets me to that ideal state of activation and relaxation. And that's actually what we're talking about when we talk about flow states. So it's like enough of the adrenaline that has you alert and ready, but you have relaxation at the same time. So you actually, and Wayne Gretzky used to talk about this. He used to say he kind of knew where someone was going to be before they're going to be there. When I've had experiences of it, there were times when the team, like you'd have 1 or 2 people maybe in flow on the team, like as a curler. Yeah. And then there's times when all 4 of us would be. And I remember some games when you were, and it was just like, there's something like everything's bright. Everything's amazing. Doesn't matter how loud the stadium is, you know what I mean? It's like nothing's a distraction. Everything is just like, this is so fun. This is so fun. This is so fun. And it doesn't build the adrenaline in your body, and you can't miss. And you can feel, you knew your teammate was going to get, and they weren't going to miss. And the other team sometime would say, let's just go. They would just know it, because if they weren't in the same state, then there was no way they were going to win. And it's like when goalies stand on their head or pitchers have the no-hitter. But if you have 2 teams that actually can get to that coherent state, then you start seeing it get better and better and better and better. And the audience gets better. And so you see how it just becomes. And so we actually talk about it as a contagion. So it's an energy sort of field or frequency that then spills out, right? So sometimes the other team will actually get worse and they become disconnected more. If they're already disconnected, they'll go further into the contagion of disconnection while the other gets further in the
I've experienced this.
Right? We will have
real.
this.
Yeah,
this is real stuff. And so this can happen in business. This can happen around a board table. This can happen around a family kitchen table. What is the contagion? Do we push each other's button, or, and so it's so easy. And so we're actually recognizing that our heart gives off this field. It's a magnetic field that we give off. And so the magnetic field can determine whether we're seen as safe, which you'll see in families with children and stuff like that, or if we're giving off more of this stressed field, then, our little animal selves actually pick that up without us realizing it. So learning how to access the ventral vagal is a lot of what this polyvagal is about. Because if we can get to it, we're in more of that flow state. And when we're in the flow state, we're not running the adrenals, the adrenaline state, which is the stress state. Because the adrenaline state comes at a cost of producing cortisol.
Right.
And the cost of cortisol is inflammation in our body. And we were talking a little earlier, I think, before we might have turned things on. Many people have learned to live in the adrenal state for energy. And it's a productive state, but it has that side effect of breaking our bodies down from cortisol. And so that's actually on the medicine side of things. And when I talk about wellness, this is actually the really exciting thing about this as well, is that we're actually starting. And again, I think when we talk about thermal, cold dips, when we talk about what I do in the fascial work, that's actually where we're trying to take it, is into what we call regenerative medicine. And that's about how we start to adjust and know our own nervous system, so that we know when we're too adrenal, we know what to do to flush that cortisol out and bring that ventral vagal back up. And what are the tools that do that and work for us, and how to get more of this so we don't get too much of that. We all need a little cortisol, we all need the adrenaline, but we don't need to be filled with it, because cortisol itself is meant technically to get us across that battlefield with a gunshot wound. It feels really good, because it does allow us to survive if the lion takes a chunk out of our leg and get going. But it's not meant to be in our systems for a long time. We're meant to switch over.
Interesting. Let's go back a little bit for the audience, and even for me, I don't really have a good understanding of what the vagal nerve would do within the body. Right. So what would you say its main function is, or some of the things that we use it for most often?
Right. So the nervous system is just made up of divided into what's called the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So the vagal nerve is the parasympathetic, and the adrenal system is the sympathetic. And so the vagal nerve, basically, a lot of people are talking about it, but it's because we kind of just always just describe things as on and off, rest and digest, you go to sleep, and this. So I think what we're learning is that, I think for me, it's about this ventral vagal, which is this heart-brain connection that really is the new kid on the block that we want to understand. And that's what explains a lot of what we're doing that we know works, but we didn't understand why they worked. Okay, so that's the first thing, I guess I'd say. So if we just think of it's a long nerve, that's a cranial nerve that comes, out of the brain, comes down through the neck and through the collarbone, sends connections into the heart and lungs, goes down through your diaphragm, and sends connections to your gut all the way down. So this is where, if you get the feeling in your gut, good or bad, it's telling you something, right? And if you get feeling in your heart, it's telling you something. So it's the nervous system responding to what we're experiencing and how we're interpreting it and feeling it, right? So the gut reaction in us comes from the vagal nerve connection down there. So we can have nervous butterflies, but it might be a good thing. It might also have the heart thing, and that we're excited about something, but we've got some of that vagal nerve, excitement going on at the same time. Yeah. Or we can have it where we've got fear, and it actually starts to send a signal through our body that we feel unsafe, because if the heart piece doesn't kick in, then we feel unsafe. So that's where, so it's not just a vagal nerve, I've got it and now I've got this on, it's more like it's this, how are we interpreting our world? And then how is our body responding as a part of that? And then oftentimes the sensations we feel determine, if we're sweaty, now we might feel nervous, and then we get self-conscious, and then we sort of we get stuck down that rabbit hole.
So do you think people can learn to master this and control
absolutely.
It?
That's actually what it's about.
How would you start to do that? Are there exercises? Is it breathing? Do I run on a treadmill?
All kinds of things. Absolutely.
What do I do?
Yeah, and so I think the piece of it is any of these things can work. And what we've been doing is saying, we have a tendency to make, here's a solution, here's the answer.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, a lot of us. As opposed to recognizing, depending on the environment you're in, your nervous system's going to be different. Who you're with is going to change your nervous system. Like if you guys maybe were aggressive, and I might be more elevated, I might be more adrenal, and I would probably be here doing, whether you could see it or not, I would be doing maybe some breathing. I'd be doing some things in my body to try and keep bringing my nervous system down, because I wouldn't want to be having this conversation from a place where I felt over-adrenalized, because I'm not creative in that space, and I'm not receptive in that space. And I might start speaking really fast, and then, you know what I mean? And then the conversation maybe wouldn't be as fun.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
So what we're looking at for people in trauma, I mean, there are, you know, therapies like eye movement therapy and the various things that they use in the body and what's called somatics, and I use a bit of somatics, which are body movements of ways to start to take where these old memories are held in tension in the body and move them out, along with learning how to process if you hadn't learned how to process it. So maybe you had abuse, or you had somebody yell at you, or you had something happen, like somebody died when you were a child and you couldn't understand how to grieve, right? They'll teach you how to process that emotion. In others of us, it might have more to do with performance, which is like athletes and maybe business people, musicians in particular, you know, any of the creatives and artists, you know, they play on this cusp of like always trying to find these zones of creativity. And some people will see, I don't know if this is going too far down the rabbit hole of your question, but, you know, I've talked with some friends of mine who are creatives, and we say, you know, we all know artists. We've seen the sad stories of artists that we lose to suicide or drug addictions or other things, because they get so far sometimes into those really amazing places that they can actually downregulate themselves into more of that neutral balance. And because life down there is kind of too big of a contrast. And so sometimes they use drugs or alcohol or other things, right? We kind of lose them a little bit. So that's one example of sort of the extremes, you know what I mean, of what can happen. If we learn to regulate, though, we can bring ourselves up, and then we can learn to sort of bring ourselves down so that we can just, you know, maybe sit around and do the routine, go to the grocery store sort of things, right? You know, because it can be a bit addictive in some ways to get in some of these more expanded states.
Well, I think people get into patterns and habits.
Yeah.
And they get trapped.
Yeah.
In
loops. I call them loops.
Loops, okay. Getting caught in these loops. And the hardest thing in the world to do is to break a habit or a loop.
Right.
Because you just keep doing the same thing over and over. It's what you know. You've become comfortable even though you're in pain.
For those people, I would suggest The Power of Habit. It's a phenomenal book.
Yeah.
It teaches you about the cycle and then basically identifying the triggers and then replacing the triggers with something else. Yeah, absolutely phenomenal.
And learning. So one of the things I like to do when you go back to who would come to me. So some people come because they have body pain. What I've been trying to do for a while, because I just saw the patterns. I mean, I've seen probably over 40,000 people at this point. You know, I've seen a lot of people. So I guess one of the gifts you have if you do something like, and you know, this has been a passion of mine. So there's not a moment that goes by that I'm not always interested in something about healing and, you know, and you know, any of these things and what's happening. And so then I've also seen, here's what worked with this person, and here's what worked with this person. And I might see 100 people the exact same thing, but we've had to nuance a slightly different way to break the loop in each of them, even though they all have the same foot pain or back pain or neck pain or migraines, whatever it is that come in. So a lot of people come in with body pain because the nervous system is going to show up as body pain. It's going to show up where we hold these tension points. And if it holds an old memory, it's locked in there. And so it's a loop that we learn to just run that program. Now, we may have picked it up playing a sport where we were really adrenalized. You know, when I was curling, I had a shape that I took. You know, when I was going to sweep, and I had a different shape I took when I was going to throw. And they had to be very different because throwing has to be slow and steady. And sweeping has to put your head down and go as hard as you can to throw up, you know? And you would have to do that and then stop. Like curling is an interesting game that way because, you know, hockey, you just go pretty much hard and then you come off and rest. Like you do those kind of shifts. But curling is sort of like more this long 3-hour, you know, enduring thing where you go up and down like that through 10 ends. So there's different shapes that you have. What's interesting, again, that I've noticed in my own experience, and I'll go back and relate this to what I was just going to say about the clients I've seen. So when I finished curling, I took up horse riding. That was my next sport. And horse riding is completely different than curling when it comes to the muscles and the type of body that you need to use.
I would have thought they were a lot alike.
No, absolutely not. And you would think. I know you're being funny.
2,000 pound animal, throwing a 20-pound rock off an ice. What's the difference?
Yeah.
The relaxation issue of being on a horse and that I've learned about, they're massive in sensitivity. Talk about a nervous system. They're a Ferrari of a nervous system because they're a flight animal.
The animal themselves?
Yeah, horses, they're a flight animal. And so they have learned that if anything at all is a threat, they've just learned they know they can run faster than anything else.
Yeah.
And so they are huge in this flight. They don't ask questions. They just run first, right? Because they know if they run first, then the wolf or whatever it is can't catch them. They're big and fast. Mm-hmm. And they have a herd. Now we're going down a rabbit hole, but this is okay. They have a herd where they all learn to communicate to each other, and they know that if one says go, they don't ask questions, they all go, because they keep themselves together. So they're very interesting compared to dogs, which are prey animals, and cats, which are prey animals, which many of us have as animals in our lives. Mm-hmm. So the difference when you ride a horse that I learned, not even just to ride them, but to be in their energy, they are designed to pick it up if that ventral vagal heart wave is anywhere off, because it's in them to pick up an elevated heart rate. It's in them to pick up any of that kind of energy. And so they've learned to survive in the human world a little bit by kind of going, okay, that human is really, I don't really want them on me. I don't want them near me. And sometimes they'll put up with us. But if you have tension when you're riding on a horse, it makes them tense. It's just it's the nature of who they are. And so I had to really learn not to get, like if I am on a horse and we're going slow, excellent. But if you start going at a faster gait, my tendency was like, okay, I'm ready to curl, or I'm ready to run, or I'm ready to do something. And as soon as you do that, the horse goes, there's a lion. And you don't want to have a horse thinking a lion, because they're just going to go. And they don't actually think about you on the back of them. They're not going to think about anything. It's instinctual when they're gone. So it's almost like that fright you were talking about.
Yeah.
They just go. So the nuance of horse riding is this connection piece between the rider and this animal. It's not like a bike, or mountain bike where you have control of it. You might go fast, but you can stop a bike. You have a sentient being that you're doing this with. And the upside of that is you can either get coherent with them and you create magic, and you get into these rhythms and you do all these kind of amazing things. This is why equine assisted learning is doing so many amazing things on the planet, is because they can teach us this.
Yeah.
Or you can be dysregulated, maybe a bit in that irregular heart rate or whatever, a bit too tense, and now your horse starts thinking there's a threat. Sometimes they are trained well enough to kind of ignore you as the rider, but they tend to hold tension. And when they hold tension in themselves, then the ride isn't quite the same. You know what I mean? They're kind of off. So this is actually what they taught me. Much about this it came when I saw how I was as a curler, and I see how I have to be in the presence of these amazing,
so when I'm having
animals.
a bad day, leave the horse in the barn.
Well,
It's actually part of some of the natural horsemanship is actually about how do we want to start showing up in these animals' lives. And I think it translates to maybe when you're having a bad day, what can you do before you go into the kitchen with your child? When you're having a bad day, the same thing. What can you do before you walk into the boardroom with your people? When you're having a day, what do we do to recognize that I'm having it? Don't hide it. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't anything, but just to recognize what it is, right?
So now I think we're getting into qualities of a great leader.
We could go there. I want to go back to what you asked about with clients. So I went off with horses, because I always go off on horses because they're like my passion. And I only started at 40. So it's not like I had a kid pony thing, but they found me and I just have just loved being in their energy. But with a client and patients who are seeking me out and they have body pain, to go back to that piece of the fascia and the vagal nerve, what we're starting to and the loops that we were talking about, what we're starting to recognize is that we hold these shapes and patterns, and they may have these connections to experiences in our life. And it might be a sport, but it might be a memory of something where we learn to protect ourselves, and we learn to maybe disappear a little bit. That's one of the ways we might describe it. Or we get big in our bodies. Like you'll see people do it, and they might even know they're doing it. Their face might change, and you'll say, geez, what's wrong with you? And they're like, oh, nothing, but they've just maybe a song might have, brought something out in them. So these are the old shapes that we have. But this collective energy is held within the shapes of our fascia as tension. And when fascia creates tension, it forms what's called adhesions. So it kind of thickens or toughens in certain areas. And when it does, now it holds our body a little bit in that shape, as opposed to being in that shape and now it can switch to another shape and switch to another shape. So it starts to create a loop. When you put that loop in, it's sending signals to the brain because the neuroreceptors are sending a signal. So you might be relaxed as anything, but your body is holding a shape of tension. And now you feel anxiety, and it doesn't make sense to you because your body is sending the signal of anxiety because you're sitting on a chair. And then we blame the chair. So where the fascial work is really, really cool and that I love is that if we break the fascial adhesions, we start taking out where we're holding those old patterns, and we're sort of opening up the option list again in the body. And if that's around an organ that's creating twist and torsion in the body, and now an organ can't eliminate as well, or it's getting a signal that there's something, or can't, it stops producing, if it's the stomach, it's, it produces too much acid, or the acid starts backing up. Now we have symptoms, and now we take a medication for the symptom.
Right.
But if we actually get in and release the fascia, this is what visceral work does. If we release it, now it takes the tension off. It allows what was in there maybe to be cleaned out and flushed out because it's no longer held in the fascia. And then it allows new blood flow and nutrients and minerals, whatever it is that needs to go in to actually get in there and heal. And so we're breaking more of the root. We're getting to the root of what might be creating the symptoms, as opposed to just managing the fact that I feel anxious because of the shape of my body or whatever, right? So that's one of the ways that fascia is sort of a part of that whole thing. I'm not saying that it's the only thing, but it's a part of how we can start to break some of the loops.
Yeah. You mentioned that that there's tools you can use to identify what state you're in before going home and cooking with your family.
Right,
is that something that you will work with the people in your workshops? Will you arm them with those tools?
Yeah, that's actually what I love to do. And I think it comes from being able to put it maybe in these examples for people. And it also comes from because I've seen so many people that, I've gotten kind of good at being able to see after talking with somebody and working with somebody what might be simple. I try to simplify it so that you have 2 or 3 things that we know your pattern in your body or what loop you want to work on and how we can recognize it and what you can do on your own to undo it, and manage it in the meantime, right? And until you can undo it. But recognizing your patterns, your beliefs, is an expansive thing in self-awareness, right? And the more self-aware we are, the more options we have when we come into a situation. That is what makes a good leader, if you want to go down that rabbit hole.
You kind of took the words right out of my mouth. It's the self-awareness, I think, is the first step in my mind. I could be wrong, but I think that until you're self-aware, you don't even realize that. So I think people live in pain and live in trauma, and they don't even realize it's just normal.
It's just normal, yeah.
So they're not self-aware enough to realize, hey, I should get an appointment with you,
right?
but they couldn't eat it. I think a lot of people, I think just about everybody's there.
Yeah, I think you're right.
In one way or another.
I think we're at the juncture where we now understand all of this, so that's why it's exciting times. We now have this research that can explain it. This is what I like to do in the workshops, is because people go, oh my God, that makes sense. Now they can start to see it in others. They can see it in their kids. And they can see the various ways it shows up, as opposed to it's just their own experience as well. Like, I think there's self-awareness. And then it's like, oh, now I see how it expresses itself in others. Now we're not in judgment anymore. We're more like, oh, that's happening to them. I'm going to go coherent in my heart. This is a little bit what healers and therapists learn to do, is they learn to go coherent in themselves in order to hold a space. And I think parents naturally do it for their kids. They try and find spaces. If they're not, they try and find a way to, to not put it on to our kids anymore. If you're not aware, then you can't control it. Right. And trauma can just erupt out of us. And I think some people, that's what happens, is it just catches them and out it comes. And then they live in that shame cycle that they, have expressed it. So, I think it's the awareness, and then it's the second piece of recognizing where on the spectrum of it is and how can I get help? And for me, it's okay, as we learn this, then also the really cool things that can come from that is as we start learning to break this cycle and not pass it on to the next generation. Well, they don't even take the trauma on, and they don't even take the illness on because we're actually learning to regulate through our whole lives. And to me, there's wellness, there's a group of children in another generation that's not going to carry this stuff forward.
Yeah, and I think generational trauma is a big thing.
It's huge.
It's huge.
And as we talk about the pandemic, that's what rose up, and it rises up to heal. Everything has risen up to heal, and we're in that process, of working our way through it.
So just to bring it back to some of our listeners, I think, like I mentioned before we turn the cameras and the mics on, our business people, or want to be business people or entrepreneurs or interested in that. And it's really interesting to hear about this. And like I just touched on a second ago, I think that if someone wants to be a great leader or is having trouble with creativity, coming up with an idea to start a business, or has a business and wants to expand and grow but not sure how to do it, that I think that you could help guide them and not give them the answers, but help them internally with all these different things.
Yeah, that's what floats my boat is when, people say, I'm driving home in the car, I heard what I needed to hear, or it made sense to me.
Yeah.
That why I couldn't get to what I needed to get to, and that's where, underneath it for me, I had said to Michael, I had this sort of my own creative wave that came, and it's like I just really wanted healing to start moving out of clinics and being something we did to fix something, and that it was something that we were now starting to live, because that to me is what wellness is like when we start to live it, as opposed to we just live in it, like you say, in the loop, and then we go in or take an aspirin or whatever, or we go for a treatment and then hop back in and do the same thing.
Right.
It was like, not that was wrong. I just think it's an evolution, from there. And that was what I wanted to be part of. So I thought of like, for me, wellness tourism, for example, is one of my most passionate things. And I think Newfoundland could just be a game changer in this because of what we have. And, I was in Ireland and Scotland on a sabbatical doing some research in this before the pandemic. And they were really moving really fast with it, and they were seeing it because they're really good at tourism, especially Ireland.
Yeah. And
I was over horse riding, and so that was one of the things I was looking at. But they, have, were telling me when I was speaking to people doing it and doing some research and follow up on it, that it was like the fastest growing sector of tourism, and the numbers were huge. And I guess because of my interest in what I do, I just went, wow, that's what a way to do wellness, what a way to do health, is like to take people back into nature, take people doing things that we love. And to me, it might be horseback riding. It could be the thermal stuff. It can be a mixture of all kinds of things. And that when we get into those places, we re-regulate, reset, and then the ideas come. That's kind of the idea of it. It's not that you just go unplug and then jump back into the fire. To me, it's like, how do we start looking at some of these things in that state of flow of how we live our lives? It's that, you're always in and out of these most amazing experiences. And then, how does it get better, and how does it get better, and how does it get better? That kind of thing.
So this is tying into the, that old saying is, do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. So if you're in that environment, that atmosphere where you're enjoying yourself, you're in the right state of mind, as opposed to high stress, high cortisol situation, you're going to feel better, you're going to do more, you're going to be more productive, you're going to, there you go, deep breath, right?
Exactly. Productivity without the tension. So I think what we got into was a lot of going at a high rate and then crashing and recovering, or then doing a bunch of fun things that sometimes maybe weren't all that healthy as a way, you know what I mean? When I use the example of some of our beautiful creatives that sometimes, we lose or whatever, it's sort of like, how do I find the balance? Well, then I go and I party too hard, or I use stimulants, or I use something, that's too much, or I sleep too much, or whatever.
So I shouldn't work myself to death, go to full burnout, and then recover by going on a bender?
Right.
Shouldn't do
you
that.
Don't think, I mean, you can.
You should go on
There's
one of
not a
Susan's
whole
workshops.
lot of, well, I mean, and so at the root of this, a lot of the terms I love is called regenerative medicine. And regenerative medicine is influenced by ecology. And ecology talks a lot, it's about like, people, they study the earth and and natural systems, right? And it's really really cool stuff coming out of the ecology fields right now. I have a client who's an engineer, actually, who's off in BC, and she's doing a program that's about sustainability, and it's all in ecology-based engineering. And so it's about the sustainability question that's arisen as well. We've been, when you burn things, you can be very successful and productive, but there's cost.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? And this is what we're looking at, is like, hang on. And then people say, well, geez, if we all sit around and kumbaya, we'll never get anything done. Isn't that, it's sort of like where we go. But this idea of flow and creativity and regeneration is about staying in this ideal state. Like there's this sweet spot where we don't go too far into that cortisol adrenaline damage piece, and then we crash down, and then we got to find a way to get back up, and then we crash down, which is where a lot of people do. And over time, that creates a lot of damage, where we can find, various places in the zone. And you might be way up in the zone, and then sometimes in the middle of the zone, and maybe low in the zone, but you go sort of up and down in that place, and you can take yourself up and take yourself down. Well, from that place, we should be in a more sustainable place. And it should be a more creative place, because we're in a better part of our brain, right, than when we get into that stress place.
Yeah.
We can get a lot of stuff done with stress. We were meant to survive wars and all kinds of stuff in it.
Yeah.
But look at the cost of it. It's a different mindset, right? It's a mindset that's often more aggressive or shut down, whatever version.
Yeah, you're so right, because, with social media today, I feel like there's two types of cultures. I feel like there's a hustle culture, where you got to work, you got to grind, you got to build. And then there's let's take a year off and travel Europe after high school and take a year off. But I feel like, yeah, sure, thanks. I feel like what you're saying is find the balance, find the sweet spot, and you can have it all.
And I think, some people might say, oh, that's a fantasy. But, creativity starts in imagination. I actually just watched on Disney, they have a documentary on the Imagineers, I think they call them. Which are
the Disney Imagineers.
Yeah, and it's like, and I just love watching these things about, some of these places. And they talk about and they are the creatives that live for failure. Because they say within the failure, if they don't live for failure, they're not pushing themselves to the edge of creativity, right? And so artists say the same thing. Like, I have to push myself to the edge where, and U2 is my favorite band. And so Bono talks about this. It's like, if I haven't written a song where I know I'll fail, then I'm not pushing myself enough. That is different than pushing yourself to exhaustion, pushing creativity and imagination. And I think when we talk about these things, some might say Pollyanna, and I go, no, living in imagination is creativity. Now, how do we actually make it practical is, I think, the sustainability piece. And that's where, not so much the practicality, but where we bring in the balance of how do we make it work. And once we figure out how to make it work one way, well, then what else can we do? So I think if we can create models as we go forward from here, and this is what we were talking a little bit of, like, here's the fun thing. What do the new models of economy look like? What do the new models of our school systems look like that match where we are now after all this disruption that we've had? What do the new models of wellness look like in healthcare? Because what we're doing, we know, is not creating what we want. So great, we can see what's happening. We can see what isn't working. It works for some people, but for a lot of us, it's not sustainable, and it's not creating as much of a joyful life that we want to have. So what can we do different? To me, this is the sweet spot we're in now. And I think what I'm trying to do with some of this talk is well, here's the science of how some of this works. Now, how does that inform creativity? How does that inform the models that we build, and having our kids in forest school, for example, and learning outside? Right. Which is one of the ways that we regulate. Yeah. Really naturally.
Walk us through what one would experience if we were to take part in one of your workshops.
Okay, so I do several types. So I have some that I've devised that are continuing education ones, actually, where I teach with other health professionals. And so those are teaching either health professionals how to stay balanced in their own life, because you used the word burnout earlier. We're all very prone to it. I've burnt out a couple of times. It's part of what's informed me in this. Taking on too much of what I see, so that's one of the groups that I work with. And so I have a series called the Vagal Nerve for Wellness series, and it's 5 different continuing ed workshops. And so with them, we're actually learning how to do self-fascial release and use the vagal nerve within your own body so that you can use it with your clients and then teach it to your clients, for example. So that's one way that I do workshops. I also have a group of workshops that I do with my clients. So if you come and do one-on-ones, eventually we've done some stuff, and then you're learning how to do stuff on your own. But most of the time, to learn things, we do need that repeated immersion in order to kind of go deeper in practice of it. And doing things in groups, this is what we were talking about. Doing things in groups is really powerful. Because when you do it with other people, that whole coherence thing kicks in. So it's a bit like being in the stadium. So what I started to notice when I said about taking treatments and stuff out of the clinic is that when I used to teach yoga, and I've done other things in groups, but when you do things in groups, it's like people release and let go of things really quickly, especially if it's done in a safe way, okay? So I'm not talking about big trauma releases and stuff like that. I'm teaching people how to do self-fascial release on themselves. So what I want to inform you is like, what's your pattern? And how do you start to undo some of it yourself? Or knowing that this is your pattern when you get stressed, what can you do before you go into that meeting to take that out of your body? So immediately your body's at a more balanced state. So you go in and have the difficult meeting or discussion or heightened place, your body's not already into that state of being. So I teach, so that what we do in a workshop is sort of customized to everybody. Here's your pattern, here's your pattern, here's yours. But then together we're all kind of learning how to do self-fascial release. So I have a couple of ways I do that. You know, you can do that showing people with breathing techniques, and there are some balls that are fascial release balls that you can buy for yourself.
I picture your office being full of foam rollers.
So it's actually the opposite. I don't use foam rollers for this reason. So the type of fascia, I said the type of fascia work I do, because there's all kinds, like, you know, everybody, a lot of body work say, well, I always work in fascia. And so that's why I say fascial release is sort of a generic term. I use what's called non-force, which means that I work in a realm that's called subthreshold, underneath the nervous system. So as soon as we go deep, and you go deep on a foam roller, you've got pressure on the body, it's going to have a little bit of that rebound.
Hurts like hell.
Hurts like hell, bad words, you know, whatever that comes out. The fast breathing, the tension in the body, right?
Yes.
Now you can breathe through it and get yourself to relaxation on the other side of it. When you do fascial unwinding, you actually go in and support the body just under that threshold, and you used tools and techniques that actually start to create what's called unwinding. And so it goes into, and we guide where you go in, and that's how you break some of the adhesions that are deeper, especially when you get into organs and things like that. That's actually what we're doing.
So much more pleasant than what I've been doing.
Yeah. So it's, you know, it's still, now afterwards, some people say, I can't believe this. You barely, that's why it seems like woo-woo, because it's like, you barely touched me. And I just did some breathing. Yeah. And they'll sometimes text me back or send me an email and say, I was sore for 3 days, like I just did an ab workout, like at the gym sort of thing, you know? And I said, yeah, because you were breathing and using muscles on in your rib cage that you just hadn't, that you had actually so shrink wrapped around you. And we started to release it. And it starts releasing that cortisol. It releases all that stuff that's trapped in there in the beginning. As we get through stuff, you can clear things out. Or if you get kids early enough, we don't allow it to be laid down in the first place, you know? And so what the idea of this is you get to a place where you've released most of it. So now you're pretty much not picking it up again. You're always taking it out. So yeah, foam rollers work, but they're often more surface because they have that threshold piece, right? You know, with the nervous system. So that's kind of why I like to do what I do, is sort of show people, this is the vagal nerve stuff. So how to work within that zone so that you can also get the nervous system repatterning, and you can also get the biochemistry and start to get some of the more of the get into the vagal nerve, ventral vagal nerve stuff.
So let's talk a little bit about that. How do you use the breath to assist the vagal nerve?
Right. But there's lots of techniques out there, right? So, I mean, and there's the yogis were masters at it, and the Tai Chi and Qigong and the martial arts, have been masters of these kind of things.
So there's something to all that.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, right? So the vagal nerve stuff just explains what they already knew for like 5,000 years, right?
Yeah,
2,000 anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. What I do is a mixture of, I'm trying to work with fascia. And so to work with the vagal nerve, we actually breathe into the rib cage. It's not breathing shallow. People say don't breathe in your chest. But if you breathe slowly up through the rib cage, you can expand your lungs. And as you expand your lungs and build, your lungs inside, I often say, are like a balloon catheter, where we're expanding and using the lungs to break up fascia. That's one of the things that we're doing. And the second thing is when you do the patterns that I use, it gets into kicking in that vagal nerve for you. So we're using the breathing to open up some of the fascia. We're using the breathing to kick in the vagal nerve. And then I mix in what's called somatics, which are some of the body movements, so that you're creating sort of a new map. And so what I'm trying to help people do is make it easy. If you can't get in the cold water, you're sitting at a boardroom table. Hang on a second. I got to go plunge. No, I mean, that's kind of fun. And, I kind of imagine that. That's what I imagine. Like, we'll go for horse rides, and then we'll go for a plunge. And then maybe we'll sit around and have the difficult meeting or the creative meeting. Like, that is actually how I imagine. Like, isn't that a good world, That's the world I want to live in. And then maybe you jump in for some table work if that's what you needed. Like, that is one of the versions of retreats, for example, that I do if they're multi-day. It would be that kind of thing, a mixture of fun, a mixture. You've got the one-on-one table work. There's the learning of your own pattern, and there's learning of the tools, and then you take them home with you, and you've had a deep immersion, right? So yeah, that's kind of like, I've just gone off, and that's the other version of what I do in some of the workshops. When we do the immersions, that's maybe a 1 day or a workshop that somebody hires me for. It might be very specific, so it could be customized to your group if you're a sports group, or, I've worked with kids, and I've worked with a group of women just recently. We had a wonderful sort of 4-hour event. And, for them, it was that ability to take some time out, take some of these tools home really fast, learn where some of their spots were in their body, have a lunch, be with like-minded other people, really hit the reset button and go home with a bunch of stuff at the same time. Did I answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay. I think so. Yeah, that's good. I'm just trying to... I came up... I found this a while ago and in this conversation. And I'm just trying to think about a real-world situation, because I've met people like this, and hell, I think I've been like this a bit myself. A little bit of a naysayer, not really buying into it. And let's set up a scenario, and I think a lot of people are in right now. Okay. Someone has carrying around a lot of stress, carrying around a lot of tension, just really in a lot of pain for what's going on with their business, with their personal life, with money, and their mindset is, well, it's going to be fine. I just need to get through this. Once I get that loan paid off, once we iron this out in my relationship, once I overcome this obstacle, everything is going to be fine. So I'm not going to go and sit down and talk with you in this scenario,
right?
Because you can't take that away from me. You can't give me money to make my money problems go away. You can't fix my relationship. What would you say to somebody that had put up these walls and these boundaries to accepting your help? And do you think that you could actually help someone like that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think when we talk about sustainability, we're also talking about the right use of resources. So I've had people come and I see them stuck in the loop and they don't get out. And I'm kind of going, this isn't working for you for whatever reason, right? And there can be a number of reasons, and that could be maybe there's trauma, and so they actually need to go work with that, When something is going on in your life that's really challenging, and right now there's a lot of people after the pandemic going through it, including myself. My business was shut down during the pandemic. So, a lot of things changed for me. And I got a few other things going on in my life right now. I have a horse that's, later in life and who's, not well, and, other things that pull at you. So in my own example right now, if I allow that cortisol to build up and wait until I get out of it, a lot of it is built up and it's stored in the body. And now that map has been running and it's silent. So that cortisol thing is silent. And then you get to the other side of it. And a lot of people, they often say this, they go on holiday and they get sick. Because as soon as you actually stop,
it's true, yeah.
The body says, finally, you're going to let me heal.
I feel that's me.
And so it happens, and people say it with retirement and other things, because that's actually the mechanism of how it works. And so we stay in that survival. And unfortunately, what we're doing is allowing that cortisol to build up in our body. And so, yes, I may not be able to take the stress away, but we can show you how to minimize the effects. So all the effects of the cortisol and the effects of your nervous system, you may not feel as good as you would if you were at the other side of whatever the life stress is. But you are taking proactive steps to reduce what you're carrying and what you're putting on yourself.
And wouldn't you say by taking those steps, it's going to help you get on the other side of that even faster?
I think so, because I think, if we can get more creative, sometimes we can get through things a little better and a little faster sometimes. Now, sometimes things just take time, whatever it is.
Sometimes things just suck.
Sometimes things suck and they're just going to run their course, and that's the ins and outs. And sometimes things are wonderful and, we ride that wave, that's one of the...
Yeah.
That's just life, right?
This is a magic. It's not going to make the bad things
That's what I mean.
away.
I'm not talking about Pollyanna. But when we talk about maybe long term, if we could start creating more opportunities where we don't pick stuff up, then when some of these challenges come, maybe we're less impacted by them. When we maybe come up with new solutions, maybe we have less of the big traumatic events. Life is life, but maybe we can break some of the illness cycle. So now we're not dealing with so many people in our lives dealing with serious illnesses if we start breaking that. Do you know what I mean? Like for our next generation.
Yeah.
So I kind of look at it, in that bigger way of what we can possibly do as we change things. What if we're all a little more regulated and then we don't have as much work stress? And so we don't have these toxic workplaces that we talk about. What if we actually start shifting this and we are so connected to our bodies, we now know we don't want to put chemicals in it. So your body's your own piece of earth is what I've always said.
I've never heard that. That's good.
I like it.
Yeah, and if you take care of this piece of earth in the way that you really, really want to, well then if you get to that place where you're kind of going, I don't want pesticides in here, then you're seeking out the farmer who doesn't use pesticides. You're seeking out the products that don't use pesticides. Now what if millions of people decide that? Mm-hmm. Look at the change that we make in the world. So that, that's where I go with it. It's like, it's a decision and a choice that could be really exciting. And when I talk about ripples, that's kind of where I'm going with this. It's like, what can we do if we have this conversation and then other people, if anybody listens to it, you guys hopefully have lots of people that want to listen to you. So I get to tag along to that. That's where I felt excited about this. Was like, okay, how do we do things where it becomes a bit of a movement, and a movement of just all you have to take care of is your own piece of earth. And as you do that, you start seeking other things, and you find other people who are also jumping in the pond. And then it becomes like a bit of a social thing. And now they're introducing you to the greens, that are actually going to help the cortisol be removed from your body. Now you're feeding that to your kids. Absolutely. You know what I mean? And now we're going to pick blueberries and we're not importing something. And now there's a blueberry farmer who actually has a whole bunch of clients, you know what I mean? And now we have local industry. I mean, that is a sort of, to me, it's not about setting up the old way of the homestead and going back and living in the past. It's like, how do we do these things like in really creative ways to create a more of this regenerative type sustainable
Very
world.
Interesting. Because I feel like in a lot of ways I am trying to go to the homestead, get a little community and reduce the home size.
Right.
So that's certainly something I'm active in trying to do right now.
But it's a modern version. It's not going back in time and saying, okay, I'm going to go back and live off grid. Mm-hmm. It's actually the opposite. I think what you're doing is actually the innovative thing. And that's what we were talking about. I think that's what's really cool about this is like, what are the new versions? Mm-hmm. And then what happens when you create an environment like that? So what are the people drawn to that if they have this, I guess, ethos or mindset? Well, then they're going to attract more businesses that are of that mindset. And then that grows that particular choice.
Yeah.
And that starts growing the businesses that maybe match the mindset. Do you know what I mean? Like to me, it is. It's a thought. It's a consciousness. We're elevating a consciousness or creating a type of consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a trend that might not have been the right word. I think it's a mindset that's so hard to catch on because wellness has been around for a long time. You yourself said you've been at it for over 30 years. And if it's better for us, and it's the obvious choice to take this path and eat this way and to do these different types of exercises, and it's better for us in the long run, why does everybody keep the same patterns they have? And
loops, eh? What you talked about earlier?
Is loops.
Yeah.
And I think that some of it is to blame, I don't know where it started, Industrial Revolution, when people started getting busier and we geared our society towards making things more easier, more convenient, that we need to have our foods with longer shelf lives, and we put chemicals in them, and then and now
snowballed.
It's snowballed, and it's an addiction. If that's maybe the right word for it.
I think addiction is just something you do over and over again, right? So it's it's just something you do just to meet a need. It's met a need, and we created a society, and then that met the need. But what we're seeing is we're at the breaking point. It's not sustainable. The earth is at a place, and we don't actually have much choice. So we can't keep doing it because we've destroyed our planet, and so the planet is crying out. The planet will fix herself, but we won't be able to have the beautiful life that we have. I really see this as why it's a movement for me. It's about recognizing that we can create something, I think, in 10 years. That's an incredible planet with balance in it. I think the young generation have all the creativity we need to clean the planet up. And I think if we can empower them to be able to do it, that they're going to want to do it and they will do it. We have a second group of people that maybe think technology is the answer. This could be a whole other conversation. But how do we? I'm of the mindset of like how if we connect to our piece of Earth and we use the technology with imbalance of that, I think that's when we can probably get something that's really cool. So when you love the Earth, you want to do things in nature and you want to have fun and maybe climb and swim and kayak and horse ride and travel and taking culture and taking music. Like we're not, moving ourselves off into the virtual technology. And if you do that, then you also need to have some wellness within yourself. Or if you're of the mindset of sustainability, you're going to think about sustainable travel. Mm-hmm. You're going to want to maybe create the planes that don't pollute, the very place that you want to go visit, right? So these are some of the really cool things, I think. And it's this stuff that's happening. And there's a whole, like Zita Cobb's Fogo Island is a part of what's called regenerative hotels, and I've been following what they've been doing for quite a while, because regenerative medicine and regenerative travel, and we're all coming from that same ecological sort of viewpoint. But I think that falls into, are you a regenerative business? Is sustainable regenerative, business? I think that's really cool ideas, what you do. I think what you were talking about with small homes and things like that, it just falls within that.
That kind of leads me to where I'd like to go next in this conversation, if it's okay. But
go shoot away.
We're coming up on the hour and a half mark, but you go ahead, and then I want to move into a reoccurring segment we have. Okay. A reoccurring segment we have on the show called Actionable Takeaways. Okay. So we'll get you to suggest a tool for the audience that they can use right now.
Well, I can do this up pretty quick. I just want to bring it back to your business. Okay. We talked about what it is that you do, and I think, like we talked about even before we turned the cameras and the mics on again, it's a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurial types, are business people, and I want to hear more just about the raw side of your business. How did you get into it, or was it just always something you did? Is it something that's just natural to you? And like in your business, what are the obstacles that you face? Getting clients and sales and marketing and all of these things that, regardless of what industry you're in, we all face as business people.
Yeah, you start out like with one client, and then it's word of mouth and showing up 110% with each one. That was basically what it was. A whack of student loans from 2 degrees, and then business loans to start. I was lucky enough that with some professions that you can at least get the backing, you know what I mean? Like from the banks and things like that. So, right. but you take on a lot, and, anybody in any of the, so you take that load on with the investment of what you're going to do, over the career. But it took a while, you just basically stand on it and you keep going. And, word of mouth was basically, for me, how my business built. I mean, that's how it works, For what I do, some people advertise and do all that kind of stuff. And I think nowadays, a lot of people do video. That's actually what most people do. They videotape their sessions. Mm-hmm. We've talked about that. And if we go back, this is something that I'm having to move more into. I was sort of old school, and everything was more word of mouth. Nowadays, people are going online and actually looking. They'll want to see what a retreat looks like. They'll want to be able to maybe see some videos, maybe some of my credibility, even though I've been at it a long time, if I'm going to start moving into some of these new places and some new people that I want to work with. So that's kind of, I guess, the challenges are really just getting, having the patience to build it, as opposed to like some technology stuff, which is like they want things to be really fast. This kind of work for me is about showing up 100% and building it over time. That was what it was.
So when you first started, you're saying you weren't an overnight success.
Absolutely not. I still remember who my first client was. It was another chiropractor who, sort of didn't have room to see them and sent them along. And so then that was that. But then they sent somebody else, and then it just becomes that sort of,
speaks volumes about providing good service, being yourself, being a good person.
Doing authentic work, right? And I think, if you're authentic about it, it usually has a way of working out because you're passionate about it and you'll keep at it, right? Even when it's a challenge.
This guy's been in business for probably over 10 years or approaching 10 years now?
No, pushing 12.
12 years? Well, and I don't think you've ever advertised, except for probably on my TV show. But I mean, you've gotten a lot, I think, through word of mouth. Is that not right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's when you show up, you're authentic, you believe in what you're doing, you put your best foot forward, and you're true to people. Yeah, most of my business. 95.
You want to give, you know? You want to give and you want to share what you know.
Yeah.
And you want to help people.
So there you go. That's the most important thing. And
I think so.
especially in the service business, I think.
Yeah.
Like, depending
I
on...
think in anything, because if you want personal satisfaction, you kind of want to be there too. So if you're an artist, or even if you just do something really practical, there's something in us as human beings that gets quite a lot of satisfaction about something when somebody says thank you, or somebody says, oh my God, you know, you just really got me out of a jam, or whatever it is, you know, it's the simplest thing, even at a gas station or something, you know?
So I feel like you've been so long and been self-employed or running your own business or whatever term you want to use there. Did you ever have a job? Like before you, like, well,
when I was a kid.
Where did you start?
Yeah, I mean, I worked as a waitress, you know, I waited tables and, you know, and I, you know, babysat like at 12, 10, I think it was my first babysitting job. And, you know,
so
I always had
right
a
out
job.
of university and just dive right into your own business?
Once I finished chiropractic, you just come out and, you know, you open the shop. So I came back and opened up what was called the Water Street Holistic Health Center, 1997. And hung the sign, and I had an acupuncturist and massage therapist that I'd met in Toronto who were from here, and we opened it up, and we had yoga. And there was chiropractic. And
you just knew that you're just going to go come out of school and just open up your own practice. That was
and that closed, and then I went and worked with someone else, and then I've had several incarnations, you know. So well-being is
the hardest thing you came over.
The evolution of all of that I felt was what I wanted to express creatively to match what I want to see in the next 30 years on this planet.
Yeah.
So making a choice to say, okay, you know what? I want to be part of this. And others, I don't need other people to agree with me. This is just what I want to contribute my life to, where a bit of what we say the 7 generations, where what can I do that shifts the momentum to loving this piece of earth that we have and seeing what happens when we do that, and getting other people interested in do that and seeing what happens when they do that. That's what I want to see if I look at what my business does, what Mark does over the next 30 years.
That feels like you have incredible clarity and unwavering faith in what you're doing. But have you ever come up against a big obstacle in your business and like, this is it, I'm
Every
done?
day? All the time? Well, I mean, look, I work in wellness. So, you know, whether you're made fun of, whether you're discredited, whether you're seen as, well, you can't make money at that, or, you know, there's kinds of things that come at you. And so, yes, I've had burnout a couple of times because I've just overgiven and taken on the pain sometimes, you know, like as a healer. So that was a huge challenge for me. And I see the burnout that's in many healthcare workers right now. You know, there's a lot of that in teachers.
Sure is, yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think in business people, I had a few friends in business world that through the pandemic, what they had to do to survive, they just said we were shell-shocked and spinning like crazy. It wasn't like business that was creative and flowing and even leading edge, you know, and so they're still trying to process some of the effects of that. So this is an example, I think, you know, of what we have right now. And I think we all have that maybe in our own micro versions. You know, if there isn't a global event, we have personal events that will do that. So I think, you know, constant challenges. And
your
if
approach is just handling those now.
Yeah, you know, you have to. I wasn't. I mean, I haven't, you know, I fall like everybody else, but I'm finding my way out. And part of why I did this was that one of those reasons was sort of like, I just felt like I wanted to do something different so that I didn't burn out again, or I didn't have regrets.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that hasn't been easy because I actually have shifted the way I did, you know, just see people in the clinic and move out in these workshops and move out in some of these ideas of doing talks and moving out into trying to get other people's mindsets and consciousness sort of thinking about, hey, what can we do that's different, you know? So there's been a lot of challenges in that. I feel a shift in it now. It's like people's brains are starting to come back online a little bit, and I think creativity is starting to open back up a little bit. Travel has opened up, in better ways. I still think we're dealing with the economy and stuff right now. But underneath that, at least I'm seeing people really coming to the workshops and going, oh my gosh, this is something I'm really interested in. A lot of people are like, how can we come up with creative ways to make this accessible to people? That's one of the things that I'm looking at. How do I find ways to get this out there to people who can't pay for it? Or how do I find ways? This is sort of a social enterprise aspect that I'm looking in, because I really love social enterprise models. And that's why I'm playing with that. So I have a social enterprise that I've named Healers Creating Change. I'm going to do a podcast, actually, is one of the things I've talked with Michael about that. And that's about bringing healers and creative people together to have conversations.
That's going to be interesting.
And see what happens and what we might create, And I've already got a few ideas about that. And from that, what do we create? So I'm really interested to see the intersection of how healing would come through events that are creative based. Or how do we create creativity through events that might be wellness based and things like that. So will that seg into more of the opportunities of the retreats, more of these opportunities of travel, more businesses that think, hey, this is where we should have our meeting, is, who's going for a horseback ride and who's doing this, and then we come back to the table. Who needs to go off and have some body work? Who needs to go, you know what I mean? And how do we start creating more of those? That's really juicy to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to have you back for sure, because we didn't even get to touch on something we talked about, which was your idea for creating some sort of content for kids, and whether that's stopping the pass down of generational trauma or whatever that looks like in your mind. I'd love to talk more about that. But before we conclude, let's do an actionable takeaway, something that you can give to our audience that they can use right now to make a change in their life. What would you suggest? Whether it's breathing or...
So
book an appointment.
Yeah, an appointment. So Michael actually did a video that has the breath technique that I do on it. And so that's actually on my website. And so that is a very simple thing to do. If we want to take part in this idea that I have of ripples, we created that video so that it would be part of, let's breathe together. Let's learn more about fascia. Let's learn this sort of technique. It's sort of my own version technique of a bunch of things. I charge $7 for it with the idea that what if 1 million people decided to pay $7 to invest in their fascia and their vagal nerve and their health?
Well, you'd have $7 million.
We'd have $7 million that goes into some of these cool things that I want to do, that gets kids connected to nature, or kids into some of the equine programs that I want to get them into. And create some of these retreats that maybe people who can't afford, so then we have scholarships and all those kind of things. Like, those are some of the things I did. So that's one thing that you could do if you want. It's just on my website, soulwellbeing.ca. The second thing, if we want to think about, I talked about with Michael that you can do self-fascial release. And so I usually use balls and teach people use these particular balls as opposed to the foam roller. But you can actually use your own hands.
So what do you do with the balls?
So the balls. So let me show you with your hands. What's the easiest way to do this? So how much time do we have?
We got as much time as we want.
You can put it in. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the key areas to open your vagal nerve is right here in your collarbones.
Okay.
Because if we think about, let's do it. Okay. If you want to leave it in, you leave it in. If you don't, you take it out. So let's go into some of the science of this. When we do, a lot of people learn belly breathing, and then they use some of the other, like Wim Hof method and some of these things. When I get people breathing, I'm getting them to breathe deep into their rib cage, up into this area, because the vagal nerve is coming down through here. And where we get most of the restriction that many of us hold, if you think about it, is often up into here. And it's a really hard area to stretch. It's really, and people get massaged all the time. They get adjusted in their neck. They get all this kind of stuff happening. So what I discovered on my own self as I was doing this, I had tons of stuff built up here from my years of curling. I was a sweeper. So you can imagine, just pounding away on that from 11 to 40, right? So it was a lot in my body. And I had every kind of body work you can imagine. I've traveled the world. Everywhere I go, I try things. I've had Thai massage, and I've been in temples, and I've had people walk on me, and I've had people dance around me. I've had energy. I've had everything done. And I could not get some of the tension to release out of here. I'd had every kind of elbow massage manipulation. I started seeing a chiropractor at 14, so,
Wow.
Had a lot. And so I started one day with my hand in here, right at this point. And I was just picking up the skin.
collarbone?
Yeah, right. So there's like a little hard point in here. This is a little process called the coracoid process. If you slide off like your sternum, you'll find a little bony bit under your collarbone. So
Okay.
right there, I was holding that, and there's a muscle called the pec minor attached there. And I just sort of took my hand and I twisted it. So if you got the skin or your shirt, you can twist it. And I held it, and I started breathing, using the breathing technique that I use, up into my hand. And then I pause, and I'd let it stretch, hold my breath. Pause, hold my breath. Hold my breath. And I kept holding it there. And I was just starting to wiggle out, and I don't even think I was paying attention when I did it. I breathed again, and I held it again, and I felt something just pop. And it was deep fascia letting go. Deep in here. And when I did, I just had this rush through my body of warmth, calm, almost euphoria. And I could move my rotator cuff in a way that I had never could. I used to have numbness down my arm and pain in my, I couldn't sleep on that side because it was the side that I had really worn out.
Right.
And it hasn't come back. And that was when I went, Eureka.
So do you do that often, or is
So I don't have to do it anymore because that was sort of like the last bit of fascia adhesion that had released. But for people, this is what I'll show people is like, so this is a very simple thing. You can start working with this little, pick the skin up, do a twist, one direction or the other.
So you're on top of the collarbone? I don't think I got the right
underneath.
spot. Underneath?
Yeah, like that.
Down here?
Pick up the skin. So using the balls is easy, but you can use your hand. So as opposed to pressing, you like a trigger point,
Yeah.
and twist it and hold it. And then hang out and breathe. And you can hang out, when we do fascial release, you can hang out for minutes. Like the more you just are patient and you wait for it, you'll start to notice that it's sort of like you want to wiggle. And you might start to notice that you'll feel things
Okay.
start to release elsewhere in your body. Something might shift in your collarbone.
And what is the breathing technique? Is it in?
So you're going to breathe slowly up, and I didn't want to give too much of it because I like to do that for a period of time because I want to give people what not to do, and I don't think we have enough time to do that, but if you were to breathe, just breathe slowly up into your chest with your belly relaxed. So you're not just breathing like into a belly breath, you're actually taking your breath. And once you get so far, some people can only breathe about this far because they're so tight here. Pause and just sort of relax into it. And if you can, sip it in a little more, pause and relax. And you're building the breath up into this area. So actually my breath technique is teaching people how to build the breath up into here and then how to hold and pause your breath without going into panic and feeling, stressed about being, short of breath. And I use a bunch of body movements that are called somatics that then you also start to pair to start bringing the vagal response in at the same time. So we're doing some fascial release. So you can use, so then the other pieces, then I can teach people how to use the balls or your own hands to start releasing yourself. So now you've got, like, very simply, if you don't have a lot of time to do something like a yoga class or anything else or meditation or anything else, if you start training this in your body, you've got a new loop or a way to get out of your loop very fast. That's portable. You can do it in the car for 5 minutes. You can do it sitting outside before you have the meeting. You can do it in the car before you go in to see into the house because you're a bit revved. And so if you can release yourself and you start doing this over and over and over again, you talked about habits. Well, we're putting in we call them maps in neuroscience. We're putting in this map. And so what I get people to do is 5 minutes a day of doing one little release and the breathing for 5 minutes a day for 90 days. Neuroscience generally says about 90 days, we get a map.
Okay.
And now you have this map, which integrates vagal nerve, taking fascial tension out, releasing your cortisol, adjusting your dials. You need to come up, you need to come down. And so if you run a loop, now that's the habit you're talking about where you normally would need the caffeine or you normally would need to do something really big to get the stress out of your body so you don't lose your stuff, your cool, whatever. I was going to use another word. We'll keep it friendly. And now you can do this. And the more you do it, what happens to me now is I can just breathe and everything releases because I've got the map. If I can't do the breathing, sometimes I can just move a certain part of my body and I get everything going into vagal tone because I've just mapped it and mapped it and mapped it. So when I ride my horse and I start to feel myself go into the too much engagement, I can actually just do like a little shoulder wiggle, and my body goes into the other zone, the vagal zone.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm sort of trying to make things simple for people. Is like, okay, yes, all these other things are great. How do we get some things going that are actually really practical, like on the fly? Or how do I make it easy for people that don't have the time? Or how do I make it easy for people who've never meditated before or done any of the other techniques, And so this is a big leap for them. And I find that generally anybody can do this and they find huge results. So I've seen really cool things happen. We didn't get into the biome, which is the other piece of it, right? Which is the probiotics and things. So when we talked about the vagal nerve and the gut, that's the other piece that I do in my workshops, is help people start to understand how important this wonderful organisms that we have in our gut. And if we have the wrong ones there, and which most people do, it's called gut dysbiosis, how it interrupts this nervous system piece that we have in the inflammatory piece and immune system. And what I'm seeing when we use what's called hyperpopulation, which is putting more than is normal there, as opposed to just treating irritable bowel or after antibiotics or something. But when we're seeing research come out, when we hyperpopulate, we're getting these amazing healing responses and brain body responses. So it's another thing that I'm helping people sort of start to learn and play around with, because probiotics is pretty accessible. If you got to pay for them. But you can get it like through kefir and some other means as well, right? So that's the other area that I'm playing with. So how to put these, this is kind of probably I'd say the take homes is, you can go and look into some of that. You can buy yourself some of them. They're pretty safe to use, without too much worry. They don't interact with medications or anything for the most part. You can buy kefir. You can buy it in dairy or non-dairy. All these things are actually very simple. So I've given you a few take homes.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
there's the fascial.
Easy stuff.
These
Susan,
are all easy.
I feel like I could talk with you for hours and hours. I really appreciate you coming here today, and we'll definitely have you back if you have the time. And maybe we can get a bit more into what goes on in the gut.
Right.
It sounds like you've got a wealth of knowledge in that world.
Some of the other fun stuff that we talked about that we didn't talk about
And
today.
I know that you mentioned how people can reach you a couple of times. Maybe we can just touch your
right.
What's the best
So
way
the
to contact
website
you?
is soulwellbeing.ca.
So,
And right now I'm looking. I put the workshops up there and any events that I'm having, so people can check that out. I have Instagram, which is O'Leary Soul. O'Leary Soul, and the Facebook is Soul Wellbeing as well. So any of those.
They're pretty easy to find.
Easy to find. Should be. I'm not great on social media in that I'm not like an everyday poster sort of thing. So I just put things up. So if you don't look for it, sometimes it's probably, algorithm wise, it's not going to show up for you unless you're seeking it out. Right. But, and I'm in the process of putting more stuff on the website and changing things up so that there are more maybe interactive videos. And I'm in the process of creating a couple of workshops that are do at your own pace, so that say you come and do a one-on-one, now you've got something you can do yourself, in the interim that continues, so you can keep, because this is a lot, and so if you learn it all in a visit, instead of having to pay a bunch of money coming for treatment or learning this, and you can't get to a workshop, then I'm going to do a couple that are on there to make it affordable, and then so people can start even that way. So that will be on the website hopefully fairly soon, and we talked about one that maybe would be applicable to help some kids with some of this stuff. I have a couple, like I said, for professionals, and for teachers is the other one that is in process. That's kind of how you can reach me. And I'm open to anywhere in the world because I love to travel. So if anybody wants to do some really cool travel, well-being stuff, I'm so all over trying to curate some stuff for that. I have some ideas. I have one to Scotland and Ireland that is in process. One to the west coast of Newfoundland that I'm hoping will have some horse riding into the Grosmorn area. So I'm in the process of looking into that. I've done a piece of that. I had a temporary one in Iceland. I'm looking at volcanoes and stuff there. But that's kind of the other area. So there'll be a couple of those likely the fall. There'll be something happening the fall that would be a well-being trip.
Great. Well, hopefully I can get in on one of those.
Wanna come?
That sounds great. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Susan O'Leary, thank you so much.
Yeah, this is fun. Thanks,
it was
guys.
great.
Yeah, thank you.